Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for the fourth and final webinar of Cryptography, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. I'm IT Masters Emeritus Flibbertigibbet and short course MC Guy Coward. Your mentor scarcely needs introducing, but I enjoy doing it anyway. Joining us again is Matt Constable, the sunburnt, breaker of ciphers, mother of dragons level difficulty exams, which we'll talk about later, and the secret cornerstone to the Bletchley Circle. Before we begin, the usual house Zoom keeping for new players. We encourage you to get involved during the webinar and provide two methods to do so. We ask that you direct all questions relevant to course content to the Q&A section, and that you send all other questions to Hannah in the chat. I'll also accept your Matt Constable title additions for the next couple of minutes. If you're chatting, please do send your chat to everyone. It keeps us all in the loop and we can really augment Matt's presentation. We'll have Q&A sessions periodically, or if a question is particularly relevant, I'll interrupt Matt. And we'll speak at great length about the exam at the end of Matt's presentation. So please just don't bother Hannah yet. Otherwise, we're just going to dismiss all the exam questions until then. So if you see any of those, Hannah, feel free to get rid of them for now. I hope you've been having a lovely few weeks. It's enough out of me for now. Please welcome Matt. What tales of the week? And tell us about last week's episode of the Bletchley Circle.
Thank you, Guy. Your introductions never cease to amaze me. I'm going to actually miss them once we finish this particular short
I'll just send you one a week.
Wait until the next one. Yeah, we'll do so by email, just on the signature down the bottom. So it's been quite a very quiet week for me, actually, which has been quite nice. I'm actually up to date with things, which is quite surprising for anyone who knows me well. So yes, welcome along everyone again for the fourth instalment in our cryptographic short course. This evening, obviously, is our last module where we talk about that last of the primitives of cryptography, which we spoke about way back in week one. We talk a little bit about hashing functions. So this evening is a little bit more succinct, a little bit more brief, a little shorter. So we've got some time at the end of it to obviously talk about the exam, to talk about the types of questions that will be on the exam, because there's one particular type of multiple choice question, which I put quite a few on, which will probably be something that most of you haven't experienced before. So I'll break down one of those in a little more detail to give you the rundown on how to answer those questions. I came across them some time ago in one of my previous academic forays. And while they are multiple choice questions, they're quite a deal more difficult than the standard multiple choice question, and a really good way to test the knowledge and the information that you've been able to retain over the course of these 4 weeks. But all of that towards the end of this particular session. So with all that in mind, let's kick on for hashing functions and see where we get to by the end of the evening. So the outline for this evening is pretty simple. We're going to have a look at some fundamental concepts of hashing functions, have a look at some security concepts around the hashing functions and how they fit into the overall schema of cryptography. We're going to talk a little bit ad hocly, really, around comparing hashing versus encryption and what the difference really is. And it's actually, it's subtle and it's quite easy, but it can confuse a lot of people. We'll talk about some basic implementations, which sort of will build on what we sort of spoke about at the back end of last week, and then look at a couple of different attack possibilities in terms of hashing. So hash functions. A hash function, otherwise known as H, generally designated as capital H, all it simply does is it takes a variable length block of data, which is the message that we're trying to hash. And so it takes that as input and it spits out or outputs a fixed size hash value. And that is dependent on the particular hashing function that you're using, so the bit size of the particular hashing function you're using. And we'll have a look at some examples of that a bit later on in some of the later slides. So the generic sort of formula for a hash is the hash value little h equals the message being passed through the hash function. So it's a pretty basic formula, fairly straightforward to understand. So the big H is the actual hash function itself, and the big M is the variable length block of data. So that just means that you can put a message or a file. So it could literally be a Word document, it could be an email, it could be a software image, it could be a picture, a JPEG or a PNG, for example. It could be anything. It could be a PDF file. It doesn't matter what it is. That's what we call the block of data or the message. Okay, and it doesn't matter what size that is. If you put it through any given hash algorithm, when it comes out the other side, it will spit out a fixed length. So the length of the hash, the output hash, will always be the same length, regardless of what size file you put into it, what size message you put into it. And of course, the primary objective is to ensure data integrity. So to ensure that our files are not changed either nefariously by someone who might be messing around, say on our hard drive, for example, or whether it's in transit. So say, for example, you download the latest version of Windows Server from Microsoft, and you get, really, really large, multiple gig image, and you download that. You want to make sure that when you download it, it's secure, so its integrity is maintained. You don't want to end up with a messed up file and then try to burn it on image and install your operating system from that and have things go wrong. And this is one of the main uses of hashing algorithms. And so what Microsoft, as an example, what they might do, and Cisco do it, a number of different vendors do it, when they put a file, an operating system file up on the interwebs for you to download, they will generate a hash value and they will place it up there underneath the file, and you download the file, you check the hash value, you run the file that you've just downloaded through the same hashing algorithm, whether it's MD5, probably not, or SHA, SHA, and it will then spit out a hash value for you. You compare your hash value that you've got to the file based on the file you downloaded to the hash value on their website, and if they match, then you know that the integrity of the file you just downloaded has been maintained and it's a true copy of the original. Of course, it also has other functions as well, which we'll look at. And one of the big things, another subject that we teach in the IT Master Stable is ITE 513 Forensic Investigations. And hashing is used a lot in forensic investigation to ensure the integrity of seized evidence and seized data. So that's another way we can use hash functions as well. So a cryptographic hash function is an algorithm for which, so it's a mathematical based algorithm for which it is computationally infeasible. That's what the CI is. So if you remember, computationally infeasible just means that you haven't got enough computing resources to be able to break the hash in this particular case. So the algorithm for which it is computationally infeasible to find a data object that maps to a pre-specified hash result. And this is known as the one-way property. And that's a bit of a hint for the exam. So a data object that maps to a pre-specified hash result is called a one-way property. So what that means is you can't download a hash. So you can't just generate, you can't have a hash from somewhere. So you may have downloaded off a website or you may have generated it yourself. You can't then reverse engineer that hash to find the data object that created that hash, for example. So if, for example, for some reason you've come across a hash value sitting out there on the internet and you think, oh, I wonder what file or what was the data that created that hash, it's computationally infeasible to do that. So you would have to create all sorts of data objects with different content and different types of files, run them through a hashing algorithm, and then compare the hash value with the one you've got. And trying to find the data object that matches that hash value is computationally infeasible, so virtually impossible. As I said, we call that the one-way property. They also have to have another property called the collision-free property, where this is about saying two data objects that match to the same hash result must be computationally infeasible to find. So that is, you can't have two separate files that you put through the hashing algorithm spit out the same hash value. The hashing algorithm has to be written in such a way that that is virtually impossible, not totally impossible. And MD5, for example, is known for its potential to generate hash collisions, and that's why some other more advanced hashing algorithms have been made. But in the basic premise is that that must be very, very difficult or virtually impossible for that to happen. So two separate different files hashing to the same value, and that's called the collision-free property. Okay, so be aware of both of those for your final exam. So what does this look like in simple terms? It looks like this. So we've got L bits. So all that signifies is L bits is a number of bits. It could be 5 bits, it could be 1,000,000 bits, it could be 1,000,000,000,000 bits, doesn't matter. It's just the bits that make up the message or the data block known as M, and as I said, can be any length. P and the L are padding plus a length field. Okay, so this is padding, which is used if the message or data block, the size of the message or data block, does not neatly fit into the bit value for the algorithm. So say if you're using a 256-bit algorithm, hashing algorithm, and you've got, let's say, 500 bits of file in which you're going to pass through that hashing algorithm, then it's not a multiple of 256. So we have to be able to put a little bit of padding in there in order to make up those bits to provide that ultimate hashing output. We then sort of place them through the algorithm, which is a bit, well, we do place them through the algorithm, and it's sort of a bit like a meat grinder here. And it mathematically mixes everything up, and it spits out this hash value, which is a fixed length, which again is dependent on the actual algorithm that you're using. And that hash value, so long as these bits that are fed in here never change, so long as they're the same, it will continue to generate the same hash value. So what that means is the same file will always spit out the same hash value. As soon as you change anything about that file, including if you add an extra space or a tab or hit enter on the end of a line and add an extra carriage return, anything, either an unprintable or printable character, then that hash value will change. And it won't just change by a little bit, it'll change by a lot. It will be totally different. And this is a great value in hashing algorithms, in that they can totally ensure that the integrity of data has stayed the same. Because even if you were to change a word around, even if it had the same letters in it, you change the order of those letters, is going to generate a different hash. All right, so we know now that that's how a hash works. So if we look at this bit of an example, this gives us an example of a man-in-the-middle hashing attack. So we know there's man-in-the-middle attacks in other contexts as well. So generally, a man-in-the-middle attack is just some form of attack where a third person inserts themselves into a conversation stream and does and either listens, they might just listen, so it might just be a passive attack, they might just listen to the data transmission to gain information themselves. They might download it and change it and then pass it on. They might simply stop it from getting to the recipient. Okay, so there's all different forms of man-in-the-middle type attacks. At the end of the day, it's just a third person inserting themselves into the conversation stream and doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So if we look at this example here, we've got Elise and we've got Pat. They're wanting to talk to each other. So Elise has taken her block of data, so her message, she's passed it through the hashing algorithm and spits out the data plus the hash value on the end of that data. So that helps her, so that helps the recipient, who is Pat, to check that the integrity of the message hasn't failed. She then transmits it in whatever format, whether it's email, FTP, doesn't matter. However, it's transmitted across to Pat. He then runs the data component through the same hashing algorithm, checks the value that he gets from that computation to the value that's attached to the incoming data from Elise. And if they match, then he knows that the data hasn't changed in transit. Okay, now that's a very simple example, very, very simple example. There's more complexity to that, but for the purposes of just understanding how hashing works, that's really where we need to get to at this stage. If we look at a man-in-the-middle attack and how that works. So in this case, Manus has inserted himself into the traffic stream between Elise and Pat, and neither Elise or Pat are aware of Manus's existence. Elise goes through a normal process. She takes her data, she passes it through the hashing algorithm to create the hash value, appends it to the data, and then sends it off down the data communications channel. Manus now intercepts it, and he takes that incoming packet, he takes the data, strips off the hash value, does whatever he wants to the data, whether it's might just be copy it, in which case he doesn't really need to strip off the hash, but he might change it, for example. So it might be some sort of financial transaction from Elise to Pat, and Manus has decided that instead of Elise's account number, he's going to change it and put his own account number for the deposit. So he alters that data, which is why it's now data dash. He then passes it through the same hash algorithm, but because it's changed, the data inside there has changed, it now generates a new hash value. And he sends that on to Pat. Pat is none the wiser. He just thinks it's come from Elise because Manus has inserted himself directly in the middle of their communications channel, secretly. Of course, Pat, unbeknownst to him, he simply passes the data through the hashing algorithm, compares it to the hash value that is appended to it from Manus, sees that they're the same, and assumes that nothing has changed in transit. And so he will then deposit his money, for example, into the account, in this case, Manus's account instead of Elise's account, and Manus goes off on his merry way with the money. The interesting thing is this has and does and still will work because of the way that banks in some part of the world don't check transactions, and they won't necessarily give you information about where money has come and gone from either. So it's very difficult to track down. And if it's not a huge amount of money, most of the time, not much is done by the bank or any law enforcement agencies as well. And without spreading too much about that, I know that from experience with it. Not personal experience losing money myself, but having a close family member lose money through something very similar, a hashing attack, in a very similar way to what I've outlined there. So it does happen, it can happen, and it will continue to happen under current laws and guidelines.
Indeed. Were they cricketers' names, Matt?
Were those cricketers' names? Oh, what makes you think that? Did you pick that up, Guy, or was it someone in the chat?
No one in the chat. I was surprised. Anyway.
Yes, it is. It's Elise Perry, Manus Labuschagne, and Pat Cummins, of course.
Well, yes. It's not a great. It's naughty Manus.
Yes. Oh, he's a bit of a mischief maker. All right. Anyway, we continue. So, message authentication code, MAC. Okay, so this is a form of hashing. It's also known as a keyed hash function. And this is used between communicating parties when they want to share a key to authenticate the information that they are then going to exchange. So in this case, we have an input. So same as we do for the hash algorithm we've just talked about, we have an input. And in that, our input is made out of a secret key plus the variable length block of data. So whatever we put into it, our message, but we combine it with a secret key. So again, it's a shared key. So it's basically like a symmetric key. Then the output from that becomes this hash message authentication code, or a hash MAC. To ensure the integrity of the MAC function, apply to the message and the result compared with the associated MAC. So what this basically allows us to do is add an extra level of security on top of our hashing. Okay, so we have a secret key, the data block, and we output a message authentication code. Now, the recipient has to have the same shared key in order to be able to unlock, if you like, that message authentication code and see that the hash value has ensured the integrity of the transmission. Now, the attacker, in this case, Manus, he can't now do his attack because he doesn't know the secret key. So where a hash MAC improves upon this paradigm here is that in part of this hashing algorithm, Elise would insert a secret key. And this down here, instead of just being a hash value, becomes a hash MAC, or message authentication code. Now, Manus, or Darth, can take that data and he can do whatever he likes with that. He can put his account number in there to make it, Pat think that he's the recipient, but he can't change this hash value because he doesn't know the secret key. And so when he goes to place the data that he's changed back through the hash algorithm, it's clearly going to come out with a different hash value, but he can't, because he can't add the secret key in. When Pat gets it, he's going to have the secret key. He's going to input the secret key into the hashing algorithm. The data that he's received from Manus, thinking it's from Elise, he's going to come out with a totally different value, and he's going to know that something has happened in transit. Now, he doesn't necessarily know what that is. He still doesn't know necessarily that Manus exists or what Manus has done to the file or the data, but he knows that something's changed. And so he then knows he has to get back in contact with Elise and say, can you send your transmission again? So that's a value in the hash MAC, because, as I said, Manus cannot change the associated MAC value, or the hash MAC, without knowing what the secret key is. Even if he can alter the message, doesn't matter. It's going to trip him up. So, digital signature. So a digital signature has a similar operation to that of a message authentication code. The hash value of the message is encrypted with a user's private key. Okay, so this is a similar process. We're using a key as part of our hashing, if you like, a hashing paradigm. So in this case, in a digital signature, the hash value of the message, so we run our message through a hashing algorithm, we take that hash value and we encrypt it with our private key, our asymmetric private key. And then when we send that information out, our receiver will use my public key to verify the integrity of that message. So therefore, the attacker can't change the message without the knowledge of my private key. And of course, this is really important for more than just message authentication, but also integrity and validation, non-repudiation, all those sorts of things as well. So if we go back to this example quickly, what would happen here is that Elise would take the data, pass it through the hashing algorithm, generate this hash value here, and then she encrypts it with her private key. So instead of using a shared key, so a symmetric key, she'll use her private key. And then she sends it across. Now, it doesn't matter whether Manus gets access to it or not. He doesn't have access to Elise's private key. And so it doesn't matter if he can change the data or not, he can't generate a valid digital signature. Because when it gets to Pat is going to use Elise's public key to verify the communication. And if that doesn't work, then something's happened in transit. And again, he doesn't necessarily know what's happened. He just knows something has happened, and therefore we have to chase up and reorganize the transmission. So other uses of hash functions, what else can they be used for? They can be used for one-way passwords. Okay, this is a really common implementation that a lot of operating systems use. So when someone enters a password in for the first time in a new system, or an administrator does it on a new user's behalf, a hash value of that password is actually stored in the authentication database. So the password's not stored; it's the hash value of that password. Now, we already know that it's computationally infeasible or virtually impossible to take a hash value and reverse engineer it to find out what the original value of the data was. So in this case, to find out what the original password was. So storing our passwords as hashes, if it's a sufficiently strong hashing algorithm, is actually a pretty good idea. And then, of course, what happens is when a user goes to authenticate, they type their password in the password field, and when they hit enter, the operating system will automatically run that hash, spit out the hash value, and transmit it to the authentication server for it to compare to its authentication database. If the hash values match, then the passwords match. If they don't match, the passwords don't match. It really is as simple as that. It can also be used for intrusion and virus detection. So we run a hash function, HF, that's my abbreviation, hash function, for each file stored securely on the system. And then we use those hash values later on to determine if the files have been changed. So it's a really simple implementation. We create a hash value for our files, and then later on at various time periods, depending on how you've got things configured, how often you want to check, you would compare those output hash values which are stored somewhere to hash values that are freshly run so you send the files freshly through a hashing algorithm, spit out a hash value, compare it to the one you had stored. If they match, the file hasn't changed. If they don't match, something's happened to the file. It might be legitimate, it might not. Okay, so depending on how you implement it, it might be the sort of thing that every time a file is changed legitimately, another hash will be generated and stored on top of the old hash. Okay, and so you can compare that all the time. So it gives you a constant idea of the integrity of your files. You might not do that though. You might have like a snapshot, if you like. So if you think of like a snapshot intrusion detection system. So I'll generate a series of hash values for the files that are on the system at time A, and then sometime later, time B, we regenerate those hash values and compare them to the stored values. And if they're different, the files have changed. And this is a common way that intrusion detection and virus detection systems work. We can also have pseudo-random functions or pseudo-random number generation. So we can use pseudo-random hashing functions to generate symmetric keys. Okay, so we can use those hashing functions to generate our keys for our symmetric encryption. And as we saw last week, we can use Diffie-Hellman to protect those in transit. We can use hashing functions to create symmetric keys for Diffie-Hellman to then protect our asymmetric keys, or vice versa, depending on our implementation. All right, so what are the security requirements of a hash function? So this gets a little bit heavy here, but there are some important points to consider. So we know easy requirement, it has to be able to take a variable input size. So in other words, big H hashing algorithm can be applied to a data block of any size. Doesn't matter how big the file is, we should be able to pass it through the hashing algorithm. In addition, it has to be able to output a fixed length output. So the actual hash value itself, which is designated by the little h. It needs to be efficient. So what that means is that the hash of x, so x just being the message, is relatively easy to compute for any given message, making both hardware and software implementations practical. So it's got to be efficient. It has to be mathematically efficient, easy, fast, to be able to generate a hash value regardless of the type of message or the size of the message that we're putting through it. These next few ones are relatively important to get your head around for the exam. Okay, so pre-image resistance means that for any given hash value, it is computationally infeasible to find Y, which is the text, another version of the text, such that capital H, hashing algorithm, Y, text we're trying to find, equals the hashing function. Okay, so what we're saying is, if we know what the hash value is, we shouldn't be able to then reverse engineer and find the text or the message simply from knowing the hash value plus the hash algorithm that created that hash value. So we know what the algorithm is, we have the hash value, we still can't get back to the original message. Okay, that's a function that hash functions must have. Second pre-image resistance. So what that means is, for any given block of text, so any message, okay, any file or any message that you want to put through it, it is computationally infeasible to find Y not equal to X with running Y and X through the same hashing function. In other words, we can't find a similarity, but we can't guess. We can't come up with the original message no matter what we're looking at. Computationally infeasible to find a Y message that doesn't equal the original message using the same algorithm. So that's second pre-image resistance. Collision resistance is simply that the hashing function doesn't allow, or doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't allow, I guess, is a good enough word at the moment, because in the absence of being able to think of a better one, it doesn't allow you to put two different files through the hashing algorithm and generate the same hash output. So we might have two files, computationally infeasible to find any pair of files or messages, so X and Y, such that HX equals HY. So that is, we put X through the hashing algorithm, we get a hash value. We put Y through the hashing algorithm, we get another hash value. They're not the same. They can't be the same. If they come out the same, then we've had a hash collision, and that means that the hashing algorithm is not working properly, or it's not good enough. Then it must have some form of pseudo-randomness. So that is that the output of the hashing algorithm meets the standards for pseudo-randomness. So it has to be random, sufficiently random that it's not easily guessed. And that's all really pseudo-randomness is, that it's not completely random as things may be in nature, because we're dealing with algorithms, mathematical algorithms that are written by humans. So there is always going to be some predictability and some level of pseudo-randomness in them. They're never going to be perfectly random, or rarely going to be perfectly random. And so the requirements are, they just need to be sufficiently random that they cannot be hash values, or cannot be easily guessed or easily predicted. So if we look at this summary, summary table is quite useful. Now, where the blank areas are, that just simply means no. This particular function doesn't exist in this implementation. So if we're using hashing functions for just hashings or digital signatures, then we have pre-image resistance, we have second pre-image resistance, and we have collision resistance. If we use them for intrusion and virus detection, we usually just have second pre-image resistance. So the other two are not implemented. For using in the implementation of hashes with symmetric encryption, we don't have any of these. A one-way password file, we expect pre-image resistance. And for the message authentication code, we expect all three. So that's the expectation summary based on each of those implementations. So just a nice little summary slide. All right, so what sort of attacks can we have in addition to the man-in-the-middle attack we spoke about before? Of course, we can have brute force attacks where we just try to pump through as many files or different types of messages as we can in order to try and generate a hash that comes out the same to a known hash. So trying to, just guess what it is, brute force it. So that's not dependent on the algorithm itself. It's really only dependent on the bit length. So the larger the bit length of the hashing algorithm, the more difficult it is going to be to implement a brute force attack. So say, for example, if you have a 6-bit hashing algorithm, or let's make it easier, 8-bit hashing algorithm, then the number of unique hash values is going to be limited. So it's going to be more likely that if you use a brute force attack, you're eventually going to find a piece of text that is going to match to that particular value. Whereas if you have a 256-bit hashing algorithm, then block size is much larger, very unlikely that you're ever going to find that. I'm not sure what the math on that in terms of how many trillions of years, like we were talking about last week with asymmetric encryption, suffice to say it's extremely difficult. For a hash function, this will depend on the bit length of the hash value, as I said, and the picking of the random values until a collision occurs is what the attacker is relying on. So just pulling random values of hashes out, just trying to come up with something. You can imagine how difficult that would be and how unlikely that would be to succeed. We can also use cryptanalysis, and this is where we look at the weaknesses within a particular algorithm. So what we're trying to do here is exploit some property of the mathematical hashing algorithm to try to perform a different type of attack depending on the sort of property that we're looking at, rather than just trying to do a brute force exhaustive search, because this one over here is going to take us eons, literally. This one over here, probably half an eon. So still very unlikely to succeed, but it's just attacking the same problem from a different direction. So in this case, we don't care about the algorithm. We're only worried about trying to find the bits, and therefore the bit length is what's keeping things secure, because the longer the bit length, the more possible combinations, the less likely it is you're going to be able to brute force this thing. Whereas this one over here, cryptanalysis, that's a process of actually attacking the algorithm itself. So looking at the algorithm, how it's written, how it constructs the hash value, and seeing if you can mathematically find some loophole that you can exploit. Now, what those loopholes are, I'm not the right person to talk about that, because that's really heavy-duty mathematics and that's way outside my abilities. But that's what we're looking at. We're trying to exploit holes within the actual algorithm itself. So if we look at the general structure of a hash code, this is a bit what it looks like. Okay, so there's lots of moving parts here. Look, this is really provided for your reference to slowly digest rather than have to memorize all of this. And I provide this merely to indicate how complex these things, and this is a relatively, this is a diagrammatic form, so you can imagine how complex the actual algorithm and the mathematics behind it are. And we saw that that was alluded to also last week when you would have gone through the RSA activities and seen how quickly things can become very difficult to handle from a mathematical perspective by simply making the prime numbers slightly larger, slightly larger, slightly larger, and things become really difficult very, very quickly. Same with hashing. Mathematical function that can become out of control very, very, very quickly. So Cipher block chaining is another implementation. So we've got Cipher, but we've got string chaining, we've got block chaining. So block chaining, just in this particular example, is another evolution, if you like, of hashing algorithms. So we didn't talk about it too much in terms of our encryption, but Cipher blocks, and we talked a little bit about blocks and streams. It's the same sort of idea with reference to hashing as it was to our encryption systems. And while we didn't go into a lot of detail on that, it's just interesting to compare between what happens in hashing compared to what happens in encryption itself. So in this case, proposed functions, so cipher block chaining functions are based on cipher block chaining, but without secret keys. So in this case, we're with a message authentication code, we use a secret key. In cipher block chaining, we don't use that. So in an early example provided by Rabin, what they did was divided a message into fixed size blocks. So let's say they had a file of 1024 bits in length, and they divided it up into, say, 8-bit blocks. And then they use symmetric encryption to compute the hash code G. So they take the initial value, they then break it up into a number of different blocks. They encrypt each block using symmetric encryption, and then they generate the hash key from that. So if the encryption algorithm, however, in this case, so again, the security of this is going to be determined by the actual algorithms that you use, okay, the bit length and the algorithms you use. So in this case, if we said we were using DES, which is only a 64-bit encryption protocol, it is going to generate a hash that is not considered to be secure. So it is possible to break that one down. Okay, if we use a different symmetric algorithm, say something like AES, particularly with a 256-bit key size, then again, your hash is going to be impervious to pretty much everyone.
What?
This guy, go on.
What's this?
Well, this guy, see, he's taken the tricky approach, because he's gone and said, I told them I was going to use MD5 hashing algorithm, but I didn't. I used SHA-1 instead. So he's put them off by giving them the wrong information about the algorithm. So actually not a really good idea to do, because that's simply security by obscurity. And given that there's not that many hashing algorithms going around the place, it's not going to take too long to figure out that it's not MD5 in use. I just like the guy's hat and the fact that he's got a cane and he looks kind of suave. I'd love to have a jacket like that, but I'm sure you have, Guy.
Yeah, I got a couple. Should we go through a couple of questions, or
if you like, if you've got some there, yeah.
Oh yeah, we got plenty. Don't you worry about that. A couple of questions about pre-image. Michael is wondering: pre-image resistant, second pre-image resistant, and collision resistant sound like the same thing. Is there much of a difference there?
There is, as determined by here. So the pre-image resistant is just if you have a hash value, right? If you have a hash value, what we're saying is it's impossible to go and find the original message. So that's what that's really saying. So it's saying if you have a hash value, so for some reason you've got a hash value, you've downloaded off a website or something, and you want to try and find the original file that resulted in that hash image, you can't. So it's mathematically impossible to do that. So you can't guess from the hash image what the original file was. So that's pre-image resistance. The ability, so the function, hash function needs to have the ability, the mathematical ability, so that when it generates a hash value, you can't then take that hash value and know the hashing algorithm and then somehow come up with the original file. So it's pre-image resistant. So the pre-image, which is the original message, cannot be found from the hash. That's what that's saying. Second pre-image resistance is that you can't find, basically in a nutshell, you're not going to find two messages that result in the same hash value. So that's second pre-image resistance. Pre-image resistance, you can't find the original message based on the hash. second pre-image resistance means you can't find an additional message that will match the original message and generate the same hash. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well, guy, or not? Does that make sense to you, guys?
No, yeah. I think it just was useful to restate it for them like me who are.
And then collision resistance is simply that you're not going to have two different files, and it's sort of, if you like, an extension of second pre-image resistance. And it just simply states that you can't have two files that generate the same hash value. You shouldn't have anyway. We know, particularly from MD5, which is why this nice gentleman's not using it, that is possible. You can eventually find a file that will, two files that will generate the same hash value. No, do we have another one?
No, let's keep going. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So MD5 we're not going to talk about so much, and simply because we know now it's not necessarily secure. It's a little bit old. You can get hash collisions. SHA is the way to go. So secure hash algorithm in its number of different variants is more commonly used now. Not to say that you mightn't find MD5 somewhere, but you're less likely to find it. So this was oh, I've got a typo there. How careless of me. Designed by NIST. No, it wasn't. It was designed by NIST. So the National Institute of Standards Technology, which is an American government organisation, and published in 1993. So it's quite old. Yeah. So what's that? 28 years old. I shouldn't say that. That makes me sound ancient. Anyway, so it was revised in 1995 to SHA-1. It was based on a standard called MD4, which was an earlier version of MD5, clearly. And SHA produces 160-bit hash values. Okay, so the hash value that they spit out is 160 bits long. In 2002, NIST, or MIST, if you want to refer to my previous point, produced a revision that defined 3 new versions. So with collective values of 256, 384, and 512 bits respectively. So each of the hash values was progressively larger. So 512-bit hash values are going to be more mathematically secure than 384 compared to 256 compared to 160. The more bits you have, the more secure it theoretically is. And they just collectively called all of those SHA-2. That was it. Didn't decide to call them anything else, just collectively bunched them under the one name, and then whichever bit length you wanted to implement, you were free to do so. And some vendors, Cisco, for example, allowed you to implement in their devices any 3 of these values, but clearly recommended the 512-bit version. But there were other vendors that implemented certain versions of them, and it varied across communications platforms and operating systems and telecommunication systems and the like. If we have a quick comparative look at the SHA parameters and what that means in terms of block size and word size and digest, and really block size and word size are just, we know, hopefully we'll know, so a word is 16 bits in length. So it's really just a matter of doing the math and working backwards. But we're basically saying that really the 2 key columns are this one, the message size, and this one's the digest size. So you can see that, for example, for SHA-384, your message size can be anywhere up to just south of 2 to the 128. I'm not going to work out the math on that, but it's significantly large. And it spits out a digest of only 348 bits long. So you can see, the simplicity of it all. So anything over SHA-384, you can have a message size up to just south of 2 to 128, and it spits out these particular values. Block size and word size, I'm not even sure why that column's there, really. They're not really remotely interesting for what we're talking about. They become more interesting when you start talking about the actual mathematics of it, which thankfully we haven't got time to do because that would probably make my brain explode. SHA-3 is also in existence, and this was brought out in 2007. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The thing is that even now, that even SHA-1 has not yet been broken, but it's still considered in the security circles to be less than secure. So don't use it.
How does that work?
Well, what they're basically saying is it hasn't been broken yet, but they believe the capability, so the resources and the capacity to break it does exist. But in general, if you think about, this is the way I think about it, and this is just my thought on it, so I'm not going to be able to quote a reference or give you any definitive resource on this. It's just my thinking, is that when you think of what a hash value is typically used for in terms of integrity, proving integrity of a transmission or a file or some sort of image, it's probably less of a target to look at that than it is to actually spend your resources, if you're an attacker, spend your resources, time and resources on trying to break encryption algorithms. So it's really, if you would be able to break the encryption, it doesn't really matter whether you can break the hashing algorithm or not, because the hashing algorithm is just about proving integrity of the transmission. If you can break the encryption and find the transmission anyway, you don't need the hash value. You don't need any information on that. And that's that's just a simple follow. There are other implementations of hashing algorithms where the hash is the primary security function, if you like. But from if we compare encryption with hashing, why there's more effort put into that breaking encryption rather than hashing, that's my view on it, because the value to the attacker is there, where it's not so much with the hashing algorithm. But nevertheless, the belief is that the capacity and the capability of current computing systems is there such that SHA-1 is potentially breakable. It just hasn't been done yet because no one's bothered to spend any time on it because they're too busy trying to break RSA. SHA-2 shares the same structure and mathematical operations as SHA-1. And this was something that was sort of bothering NIST for quite some time. The fact that, yes, it's got a larger bit length, but the point is the algorithm and the maths within the algorithm are still exactly the same. So there's that, there's that similarity. So if SHA-1 can be broken, it's only a matter of time before SHA-2 is broken, because it's only really dependent on the bit length and the difference in bit length rather than the actual algorithm. And so in 2007, they announced a competition for someone to be able to improve on SHA-2. And the winning design was unveiled in October 2012, so less than 10 years ago. And that's now known as SHA-3. And so the structure and the mathematical operations within SHA-3 are now different to SHA-1 and SHA-2. And so given that and the fact that the bit lengths are much larger, then the feeling is that, okay, this hashing algorithm is much more impervious to attack. So SHA-3, to give you some more information on this, it's constructed using what's called a Sponmge construction. It takes the input message, so whatever we give it, our variable length message, still variable length as it is with all hashing algorithms, and it partitions it, so splits it up into fixed size blocks. So that's familiar. We've sort of already spoken about that in a way. And then each block is processed in turn with the output of each iteration BD, so that's just BD, the iteration that's designated, into the next, resulting in the final output block. So what we do is we feed the output from the first block into the second block, into the third block, into the fourth block, into the fifth block, into however many blocks we have. So each time we process, other than the first block, each time we process a block, it's not just the block we're passing through the hash algorithm, it's also the output of the previous block that we're adding to it to then mangle it up, if you like, or make it even more indecipherable previously. So you could see, in order to be able to try to break that, not only do you have to know how each block is processed, but you then have to factor into the account that the subsequent blocks are each processed using their own property plus the output properties of the previous block. And so it quickly increases in complexity as we go. Sponmge function, as it's called, is defined by 3 parameters. There is f, and don't ask me why it's f, which is the internal function used to process each input block. So that's the internal mathematical structural function. There's the r, which is the size in bits of the input blocks. So how we partition this variable length message into our fixed size blocks. Okay, so that is again a function of the specific algorithm, and that's called the bit rate. So if we've got a block size of 64, that's the bit rate. And then the pad is the padding algorithm. So as I said before, if we're trying to split up a file that doesn't neatly fit into our fixed size blocks, if there's a little bit of overrun, then, or underrun, if you want to look at it that way, we add in some padding, and that padding algorithm provides, so it's not just putting in a string of zeros or a string of ones, we have a padding algorithm which on the fly generates some random padding to put into that particular block. So it's not just all zeros or all ones. It's, again, that's not a predictable part of the algorithm. This is what it looks like in a diagram. Okay, so as we were saying before, so we've got our k times r bits, so that is number of blocks in our r, so our bit rate, our size of block that we're going to cut up. So we've cut up our variable length into k amount of blocks of r bits length. We've got our total message, which is n bits long, and we've got our pad. Our padding algorithm has provided our pad to make sure that we've got all of our blocks are full. So in this case, our message has been a little bit too short. Let me actually turn on that laser pointer, sorry. Our message is a little bit short, and so we've added, the padding algorithm has added some padding characters in. We've then broken up this particular message and the pad into k number of blocks, which are r bits long. So we've got our P0, P1 block, all these other blocks. So the number of blocks we come up with in the end is k minus 1. That's our input. And then our output is simply each of these blocks. Okay, so our first block fed into our second block, so on and so forth. So again, not altogether straightforward. So you can see how, although we didn't really look at the comparison of SHA-1, SHA-2, but quite complex the way each subsequent block is, the output from that is fed into the next block and then passed through the algorithm again, and away it goes. But initially we just have our message, add a little pad onto it using a padding algorithm to get it up to our minimum size, chop it up into our block sizes, and then we start to process each block individually, feeding the output into the next block as we go along. All nice and simple, he says. So if we look at our table for our SHA-3 parameters and just have a look at some, pick some numbers out which are interesting. So our message digest size, so that is the output hash value, can be any of those 4 here. Okay, 512 being the most secure, less likely to be broken down. 224 still pretty secure, to be honest, but is less, more probable to break down than 512.
So is that characters long or
that's bits? That's
bit size, yeah.
Bits long. Yep. Sorry. Good question. That's bits long.
Thanks, Sharon. That'll answer Sharon's question.
So that's our fixed output, fixed length output. Our message size, of course, because one of the requirements of a hashing function is that it must be able to take a variable length file or message of any size. It doesn't have any maximum, so you can put whatever you like through it. Doesn't matter. It can be huge, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes. Doesn't matter. Big as you like. The block size is that R value. So this is the size of the blocks that the data is broken down into. Word size, not particularly relevant for our discussion. Number of rounds simply means how many blocks, how many times we're going to go through the hashing process. Okay, so we're going to go through the hashing algorithm 24 times. Collision resistance, that's actually both these last two rows are quite important to consider. The collision resistance means that, for example, for a SHA-3 using a 512-bit algorithm, has the likelihood of generating a collision, so that is having two pieces of text or two messages producing the same hash value, 2 to the 256. So you would have to generate 2 to the power of 256 plus 1 before you would run into a collision. So that's pretty amazing, really.
Lots.
That's lots. Second pre-image resistance, so that is the likelihood of finding, again, this is sort of looking at the opposite side of collision resistance. So finding two messages or finding a second message from the hash value of the first message to be equal is 2 to the power of 512 plus 1. So that's how many times you would have to, if you think of that from a brute force perspective, that's not likely to happen. The likelihood of that being able to be broken is really, really, really exceptionally low.
So if that's a blue moon, I wonder, what colors the previous numbers would be. But anyway, that's a different question and a pointless interjection, and you're all very welcome.
Very much. All right. That's really all we sort of wanted to talk about in terms of hashing. Okay. It's the little less of, actually, there is one more thing that I want to say, just a comparison. I forgot to talk about that. It's almost like the little brother of encryption. And there's a very distinct, very important distinction between encryption and hashing. And that is simply that a hash is one way. If you think about all the things we've spoken about, pre-image resistance, second pre-image resistance, collision resistance, and the computational infeasibility of taking a hash value and converting it back into the original file, you can see that the whole idea is that hashing is one way. So once we've created a hash value from a message, we can't go back to that original message. It's mathematically infeasible to go back to that message. And so it's one way. It provides, and that's why it only provides integrity. It's not useful for secrecy because, well, it is useful for secrecy because if you were to hash an entire conversation with someone, they would never be able to reverse engineer. They would never get back to the original message when you sent it to them because it's been hashed. It's one way. So if you look at it that way, it's exceptional for secrecy, but not useful in terms of meaningful communication. So it's one way. Encryption, on the other hand, the big distinction is encryption is bidirectional. So you can encrypt, you can decrypt. And that, of course, is really important for communication. If I send a message to Guy and I encrypt it, that's just to keep it secret between him and I don't want anyone else in between to be able to see that message, but I want Guy to get it. So if it gets to his end and he can't decrypt it, then what's the point? So that's different. And it is really important that you understand that the difference between encryption and hashing is unidirectional, encryption is bidirectional. And that's where I'll finish on that particular point. Now, this particular book here, this is I think there's a 7th edition out now. So this is the 6th edition international version. So many of the diagrams that I've actually used in these slides, of them hand-drawn ones, are actually from this book, and it is a superb reference for anyone that wants to delve a little bit deeper into what we've talked about. It covers a lot more than what we've talked about in 4 weeks, clearly. It's also, I think the next version, the 7th edition, is also the set text for the ITC 593, so the crypto subject run by Charles Uni, that we've sort of based some of these slides on. So it's a really, really good resource and reference that I would recommend to you if you're interested in delving a little bit further into encryption. It's written at a, so it assumes you obviously have some computing background, so it's not like a dummies guide, but it's a very, very useful reference and will provide you with much more information than, and hopefully, you know, what we've sort of teased your interest in over the last 4 weeks. If you were to get hold of this particular book, then it would help to flesh out a lot of that. I can also highly recommend the author, William Stallings, who's even more ancient than I am, and has written so many really good textbooks in the, stop laughing, guy, in the IT industry. It's not funny. So I remember using some textbooks by him on data communications way back in the early 90s when I was at uni the first time around. So, learning tasks, what do we got? Well, yes, we've got our Module 4 activities, which are available on Moodle. They would have been available an hour and 8 minutes ago. And you've got the Moodle, the Module 4 Quizlet. So there's a couple of little activities there on hashing, a little bit more streamlined than what it was last week, obviously, because hashing is only one way. There's only so much you can do with that. But there's some other good resources, some videos on there that are worthwhile looking at to get your head around hashes as well. But most importantly, there's the final exam, which will become available, I think it's Friday this week sometime, Friday, 5 o'clock maybe. Eastern.
Oh, sounds good.
Yep, something like that.
Check your local guides. It's on the course page. I'll just quickly look
on the course page, and it'll pop up on Friday sometime for you to be able to do. Now, you just need to pass that exam, so 50%. Don't need to get any more than that. You have to pass it. It's got 40 questions on it. They are composed of the following. Okay, multiple choice. It's a typical multiple choice, one answer. Some of those. There's some drag and drop stuff. Okay, so we've got a diagram with some missing bits, and giving you a choice of things. You have to drag and drop them on the complete place on the image. There's also some word drag and drop as well, where there's a diagram of something and you have a selection of words and you need to drag them to the right spot and fill in the gaps. There's also, speaking of fill in the gaps, there's also fill in the gap questions, which is simply it'll be a sentence or a paragraph written about a particular thing that we've spoken about over the last 4 weeks. And there will be a selection of words and word prompts that you'll have to fill in the correct gaps to make up the correct paragraph or sentence structure. There are also choose the word phrase. So there's matching ones. So match the right technology with the right word or the right technology with the right picture. There's also some numerical ones. They're more around the ciphers. Okay, so there'll be some numerical ones where you just have to really work out a number and type a number into a box, and not quite as easy as what they sound. There is a couple of true and false ones, so I'll be nice to you there, although again, they're not quite as easy as what they sound. So there's a real range of different questions. The one that's probably popping out the most of you is this one here, WXYZ multiple choice question. And I dare say probably quite a lot of you are saying, what the heck is that? And I'll show you now. So just as a bit of an introduction, I first came across these particular questions about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, when I was doing, I was a tertiary student myself. I'm still a tertiary student. I was a tertiary student myself, and I was doing a couple of subjects, and it was just the university that I was at decided that standard multiple choice questions weren't rigorous enough, which is a very fair point. And so they came up with this different type of multiple choice questions. And how they're structured is thus. So the WXYZ question is this. The instruction will be choose the correct answer from the statements below. Okay, so these are your answers, A, B, C, D. So they're your multiple choice answers. The statements that you have to read are the ones that are numbered or lettered as W, X, Y, and Z. So the way you approach these particular questions are this way. So we read it out. Choose the correct answer from the statements below. So we read statement W. Asymmetric encryption is also called public key. So help me out here, guy. Public key encryption. Is that correct or not correct?
Oh, nuts to you. Yes.
Yes,
True.
it's correct. So that one's true.
How dare you?
Sorry.
So,
you got it right. You got it right.
Yeah, 1 out of
Prove
1.
our
Okay,
clever.
retiring undefeated or continue on. Yes, let's go.
Yes, so
Symmetric.
symmetric encryption uses 3 keys for encryption. So that one's false because symmetric encryption
very
only
clearly
uses
it's one key.
Correct. Statement Y, the Caesar cipher is a type of substitution cipher. That's correct because it substitutes one letter for another based on a key shift, based on a certain number of letter shifts. So it is a substitution cipher though because it substitutes one letter for another. So Y is also true.
What's the difference between a substitution and a transposition for them listening along and me who need a constant reminder?
Yep. So a substitution cipher is where we substitute one letter for another. So we say where we have all A's, we're going to put in B's instead, as an example. A transposition cipher is where we don't actually change the letter, we just change its position in the text. So we jumble up the letters, basically. We leave the same letters in place, but we jumble them up.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
That's the difference. And then the last statement, Z or Z, the main goal of encryption is secrecy, which is true. It's the main thing we want is confidentiality, so secrecy. So then we go through our answers. Answer A, will we select A? Only W is true. Well, we know W is true, but it says only W is true. Well, we also know, we've also determined that Y and Z is true. So the answer can't be A because not only W is true. So that's false. We then look at B, W and X are true. Well, we know W is true, but we've also said that X is not true. So the answer is not B. We then look at C, X and Z are true. X, well, we know that's not true because we've just said it. So symmetric encryption is 1 key only, not 3. So it's not C, so therefore the answer must be D. It's the only one left, but let's check it anyway, check the logic. So W, Y, and Z are all true. W, yes, we've said that's true. Asymmetric encryption is also called public key encryption. Y is true. The Caesar cipher is a type of substitution cipher. And Z is true. The main goal of encryption is secrecy. So therefore, the answer you would select is D. Okay, so and all of these WXYZ questions, and there are a few, not as many as I probably would have liked to put in because I really like them. They're good fun to make. But they will all be of the same format. So you'll have to choose A, B, and C, A, B, C, or D. So you only have to choose one of A, B, C, or D based on the relative truthfulness of the 4 statements given by W, X, Y, and Z. Okay, so a little bit, and that's why I wanted to give you an example. They can be a little bit tricky to get your head around if you haven't encountered them before. And it'd be interesting, actually, it'd be really interesting for those who have encountered them before to just let us know. Because, yeah, I've only ever come across them in one particular subject stream at one particular university, but I think they're fantastic questions. I think they're great. All right, so with all that said and out of the way, it's question question time.
No, we'll go back to that slide, please, because Ray's put in a
Yeah.
very fun point about they're more fun in computer-administered exams because the order of statements and the order of responses can be randomized. We've tried to correct for that. No doubt we will find some errors, and that's why we don't release the results straight away.
Well, actually,
and you've done a very good job, Matt, I must say, putting it all in.
That shouldn't be the issue. That should be okay because the A, B, C, Ds, those answers can be randomized, but these ones will always stay the same because the WXYZ have actually been written in the question text. So they will always be the same, but the order of these may change in correct, in the exam. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Oh yes, but also the way you put it in is very sensible as far as I can see. I tried it earlier today, gang, and normally the test for me is whether an exam is good is whether or not I can pass it without having done any of the coursework, and I suspect I will fail this one. So that's always a plus. You know, you've got to make sure you revise because there is only one attempt we give you for this.
And that's it. That's the other thing too, is that every single one of the questions are only taken from the slide decks. Okay, so none of the other resources, the other videos or links or activities or anything like that, the questions are not taken from any of those at all. They are only taken from the slide decks for each week. So that gives you a chance to focus in on the material that you need to pass the exam. So it's only from the slide, the PowerPoints that you need to look at for the purpose of the exam.
Yeah, so opens 5 p.m. Friday, and yes, thoroughly study the slide decks. But if you really want to excel, I think go through all of the content before you start the exam. There's absolutely no due date for any of the quizzes or exam. It's around for the foreseeable future, and it's a really excellent chance, I think, to really test your knowledge and extend your knowledge as opposed to some of the other exams where it's just sort of tick the box, get the certificate. So thank you very much, Matt. I'm always very grateful for the effort and the generosity with your time. So the certificate will be released probably in a couple of weeks, assuming that most of the questions are behaving how we think they will. It's looking pretty good so far. But yeah, just make sure you do the revision in the sort of short term, and then take the exam before you forget everything. But do remember that you only get one attempt, and that's just to make sure that we can keep these courses open, available for everyone down the track, regardless of when they come across them. So yeah, it's not too much of an issue. Hopefully, if you've been paying attention, and if you've already got a bit of IT nous, you should be fine. But if you have any questions or concerns before you start the exam, feel free to get in touch with us. Yeah, so thanks heaps, man. That's really good. Lots of pretty pictures in there. That's always good.
Yes, always nice to have little, it just breaks up the monotony.
So we're getting heaps of questions about the exam, and Hannah's...
Gee, that's a surprise.
And Hannah's looking after lots of them, thankfully. Any other, I guess, course-related admin questions you can chuck in the chat, and there's so many students who have been around forever that you can no doubt